Pandemic.
Good evening. Welcome to Pandemic. I'm here with Mark Swift, and I am absolutely thrilled to have him on the show. If you're a genre horror fan, you definitely know his work. Freddy v. Jason, Friday the 13th, a number of other movies that'll scare the bejesus out of you, as well as Baywatch, which is not a scary movie. And we'll talk about how he went from scary movies to Baywatch in just a moment. Before we do, however, I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, to Roadmap Writers and Notes for Execs. Roadmap Writers is an online writer education platform hosted by working industry executives. If you're looking for a real-world solution to help develop, market, and sell your script, visit roadmapwriters.com to learn more. Notes for Execs is a company that guides working entertainment executives on how to give better and more effective creative notes. Now they're opening their doors to writers as well, who can learn a lot about their own writing through learning about the notes-giving process. Visit notesforexecs.com for more information. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce to the audience in the stream, Mark Swift.
Mark, hey kids, I'm doing great. Joel, how are you doing?
I am doing all right. I am not seeing, as I introduce you here, I probably should have done this before I brought you onto the screen. I'm not seeing our viewer count, and I'm not seeing comments from the audience, which we usually see at the beginning. So I'm assuming we're live. Tasha, if you can go and check on the.
Then again, maybe nobody showed up. I won't be offended. It's tough out there.
You know, I think. Let's see here. We are live. Okay. It would say 0 if we didn't have anybody. So
don't worry about
it. But anyway, so Mark, I like to usually start with some deep and penetrating question, but I'd actually like to start with something. Well, I guess really this is deep and penetrating if you think about it. In the movie of Baywatch.
Mm-hmm. Deep and penetrating. That was a pun or some kind of double entendre. But go ahead.
Yeah, it was a double entendre. We'll go with that. Why not just have Hasselhoff as the lead? Why not just bring him back to do the whole thing? What's the deal with The Rock? Who needs him?
By the way, first of all, I love that guy. I don't think The Rock
Hasselhoff
is tuning in tonight.
Or The Rock.
I like them both, but The Rock is the best. But yeah, I mean, the project pretty much, revolved around him because Paramount did develop the movie. You're not going to believe this, for about 13 years. So when we came aboard, they had a couple scripts, and incredibly, in a lot of the drafts, they didn't even have the characters from the show Baywatch. There was no like CJ and Mitch and all that stuff, and it was very, very strange. It was usually like a lot of like kind of new kids that are coming to Malibu and they're trying to make it. And we were kind of like, I think that people want to see the characters from the show. So
it was on for 11 years.
It was on for a long time. So basically, we kind of tried to get them on track with, what kind of movie, they should try to make, that it should celebrate. Our big thing with Baywatch is we wanted to celebrate the show, but poke fun at it a little bit, deconstruct it, and then put it back together. Yeah. So then, when we kind of sold them on that vision, then they had already kind of been talking to The Rock. And then when he kind of signed on, that's when everything started moving. And then they cast Zac Efron and everybody else. But The Rock is really the reason why that project moved forward because, he's a star and he wanted to do it. And by the way, he was the one that was like, I want it to be rated R. And he was like, really? I don't know if the tone of the show was rated R. But you know what I mean? That's studio development.
Well, that's another question that I was going to ask because that show, despite what it was famous for, which was, of course, the beautiful people running up and down the beach, was actually very much a family show.
Yeah, it was.
And so for it to be rated R.
Yeah, it was strange.
I was surprised about that.
We told them earlier, we're like, I don't think it should be rated R, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, they definitely were listening to The Rock, and that's the way he wanted to do it. At that time in his career, he wanted to do something a little raunchier. So we kind of had to walk that line of, pleasing The Rock, pleasing the studio, pleasing the audience. So one of the things that we wanted to do was, we tried to at least give, or this was our aim, was to kind of give, people um, the way they felt about watching Baywatch, maybe even if they liked it ironically. So that's when we kind of went a little meta with it. You know what I mean? To kind of, instead of doing sort of the straight version, which The Rock didn't want to do, Paramount didn't want to do. So you'd have to walk. You have a lot of masters when you're a screenwriter. You're trying to make a lot of people happy, a lot of bosses happy, and this was definitely one where you had a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I mean, we had multiple producers. You had everybody from Bo Flynn to, I mean, there's a lot of producers. There's a lot of cooks. So it was a complicated gig.
And so when you come into that gig, I'm guessing, was it like an open writing assignment kind of thing? You came in and pitched your take, or?
It was, in the sense that they were developing it. And like I said, I think they were doing it for 13 years before us, and they probably had 20 some odd drafts. But we had worked at Paramount before, and we had just cracked a movie for them, another movie we have at Paramount that hasn't been made yet, starring Pete Dinklage as, it's called A Lucky Day. And we had just gotten that moving. And so the executive on Baywatch basically cold called us and was like, will you guys, take a shot at Baywatch? And it was funny because we had passed on it probably 12 years ago when it was a DreamWorks movie. And let me tell you about how small the town is. And one of the executives on the Paramount movie of Baywatch was the assistant answering the phone at DreamWorks when we passed. So that's how people move up. It's a very small town.
Yeah, it speaks to the importance, as some who've been on the show have mentioned, of lateral networking, that everybody's always trying to network up a lot of the
Absolutely.
time. And maintaining relationships with your peer group, those are the folks that are going to rise with you.
That's absolutely true. I mean, I am not, if you can go to film school, by the way, great. I don't think you have to go to film school. A lot of young writers always ask do you have to go to film school? But one of the benefits of it is you have your class and you all move up together. You all enter the town at the same time. You stay in touch and you rise. But at the same time, just a quick story, you want to be nice to everybody on the way up because everybody is moving up and you want to learn from everybody. I remember on Friday the 13th, this was, long time ago. And I remember we had a huge table, Michael Bay was there, and then at the very end was a woman who was basically taking notes. And I turned to her and I was like, well, what do you think? You know what I mean? And I'm trying to engage her and she was super smart. And about 10 years later, she's the head of production at Paramount.
Oh,
so I
seems
mean,
seems like a decent person to know.
She's a great person to know, and she's a great executive. And those are the people that you sort of want to know, is the people that understand the business and they're in the trenches and move up. And there's no point in not being nice to everybody around you, because not only is it good business sense, but it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And so you get brought in by the person who used to answer the phones to say, hey,
executive.
Yeah, the executive, to say, try and do a take on this project.
Right. So then you work on your take, you pitch her, and then ultimately she's got to bring you back to her bosses. So our final pitch was everybody from Ivan Reitman to Bo Flynn to the head of the studio. There was probably like 15 people in the room. Mm-hmm. And you take over the room and you show them the vision and you tell them the way it should go. And then you either get hired or you don't.
And then you guys obviously did get hired. And then how do you manage? And I like this. We can dig in and really talk about Baywatch and then flash back to how you got there. But how do you navigate? I mean, I've been in some processes, but I wasn't the one in charge, where there are a zillion people who are cross-talking and having countering, seemingly antithetical to one another demands. How do you navigate that?
It's tough, and every project is different. This one was especially complicated simply because there were so many people and so many, you have the source material. And by the way, you also have producers from the creators of the show, and it's tough. It's tough. And sometimes it can get away from you a little bit. And I think that this project probably did. And then, of course, after you do all that, then the director comes on. And then that's really, then the head of the project is the director and the studio. And then, they have their own battles to face. And, every movie, it's funny. Um, it's so hard to get a movie made. Writers just wouldn't believe how hard it is. And then to get a great movie made, I mean, I've never really experienced it myself, but when I go in the theater and I see a truly great movie, I realize that it's a miracle. I mean, it's just a miracle. Everything has to come together at the right time, and you have to be not only great at your job, but you have to be lucky.
And without indicting anybody in particular, do you feel that movies generally are better if there are fewer, or creative projects in general, shows, etc., are better if there are fewer cooks? Or do you think that
I think that there's maybe less chance of something going wrong, in the sense that the football is handed to fewer people, so there's less chance of a fumble. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
That's the first time I've ever come up with that analogy. I'm actually kind of happy with it. I might use that again.
You could consider writing as a job.
But so I think a lot of times when you have a writer director, I think maybe, it is a little smoother, simply because it's one person with the vision, and you don't have that kind of interface between a writer and a director. Sometimes things can get lost, but writers also get better at their job. I feel like, Damien and I are getting better and better as we go. We've been in the business now 22 years, and it feels like we're just starting to figure it out. So, there's ways to navigate, and there's ways to, it's a craft, and, you do get better, but there's also a lot of business. There's a lot of politics, and you have to just get better at that. You just have to navigate it. And the people that could help us along the way is usually a good producer, and that's why I think a lot of times you'll find, just like an actor, Leonardo DiCaprio will stick with Scorsese. If you find somebody that, really works for you, works well with you, people stick with them. So that's why a lot of times you see like the same people working together over and over.
Yeah, there was a project I worked on. My one view into all of this, really up close, was a project that I started out as a consultant because, as folks who watch the show know, I have a background in politics. It was a political pilot, and then I became involved in more and more stuff. But at a certain point, I remember looking at the showrunner, and it wasn't just, there was the studio and there was the network, and there were two production companies, one that owned the IP and the other that had developed the IP, and then the director's production company, and then the United States Navy, because we wanted to shoot a sequence on an aircraft carrier.
Sure,
and they had to sign off to do that. And at a certain point, there were such contradictory things that you literally had the studio saying, like, well, maybe like we really amp up the romance and we really make it a little bit, get some of that Grey's Anatomy sexiness in there. Yeah. And the U.S. Navy is saying, by definition, all of the characters must follow Navy code. Therefore, if they are naval officers and they are on the aircraft carrier, there can be no physical contact. Well, how are you going to do romance with no physical contact? That's kind of the point. And at a certain point, I remember looking at the showrunner and I was like, you're not writing a script anymore. You're negotiating a peace agreement.
Yeah, you're navigating a process. And every project generally has, at least one major gorilla, the person who's really, everything is revolving around. In Baywatch, it was The Rock. Friday the 13th, probably Michael Bay. Every sort of project has that, gravitational center. And, that's really the person that's pushing the boulder up the hill. And that's what it takes to get a movie made. I mean, even those guys, you wouldn't believe, huge names that we all love and respect, have trouble getting movies made. I mean, it happens all the time. Happens all the time. Spike Lee couldn't get his last film made. He went around to every studio. I mean, it's very, very tough. So I have great respect, for anybody that can get it done. And that's why one of my little pet expressions is, I feel like the more you know about movies, the less inclined you are to shit on them. I can always tell, it's no offense, to anybody watching this that's done it, but like when you see it like a writer really crapping on a movie, it kind of tells me it's like they probably haven't been doing this that long, or they've never been through a development process. They've never taken notes. They've never really seen the way the sausage is made, because it is a very tough job. And, it is, it's very, very difficult, and nobody's goal is to make a bad movie, but it can happen very easily. You know, for a bad movie to happen, only one thing has to go wrong. You know, for a good movie to happen, everything's got to go right.
Yeah.
So,
And when I get mad, because I'll be forthright, there have been times, certainly just in the privacy of my home and you know, with a friend or something, that I will crap on a movie.
yeah.
But what I get mad at is, well, I'll find myself getting mad at the process. So I
Right.
watched a movie last night that I won't identify it on the air, but it's a big, exciting concept, and I felt that the execution was just like mind numbing, and I was like, I can just see.
You can see the notes.
I can see the notes.
Yeah.
I can see they're going to get confused. Actually, what if it was this? What if it was that? And I could just see it getting pushed into this thing that it didn't feel like natively it wanted to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it happens all the time. You know, I think a mistake a lot of young writers make is they get notes and they just type the notes. They just do exactly what they're asked. And they're like, look, I did the notes. And then it turned out horribly. What happened? It's like, you know, you'll always hear this expression, you have to do the note behind the note. You have to figure out really, you know, what's wrong. What are they really driving at? And then you have to solve the problem for them. You know, that's your job. Your job is not to be a typist. Writers who are typists are not going to succeed in this business. And then to give you a story about, you know, the classic thing the studios always do is they over-explain. They always think that the audience is going to miss something. They always do this. So a perfect example, you know, is, since it's our movie, is Freddy versus Jason. So, you know, we had two different franchises, and we could talk all night about Freddy versus Jason, that development process. I think we wrote like 50 drafts. But I remember
5-0.
5-0. And then when we went to the first test screening, I remember, you know, at the beginning, there's this long explaining monologue that Freddie's doing. And I'm like, Freddie doesn't talk that much. What are you guys doing? And it's like, basically the studio had, you know, recorded their own, you know, big kind of explanatory thing to start off the film to make sure that this audience wouldn't be lost. And I'm like, I think they're going to get it. But I think that that's the mistake a lot of studios make, is they think they have to over explain. So you see these movies that just have endless exposition, and it's not the way people talk. It's not the way characters talk. So that's definitely one of my pet peeves as well. Underestimating the audience.
Totally agree. It's the "you and I both know" syndrome. Look, Mark, you and I both know that we're doing an interview show.
We've been doing this a long time. We both know that. That's
how long have we been doing this, Mark? About 17 minutes.
Yeah.
My favorite version of that was on 24, because they would be recapping stuff that happened in the previous episode, but because it was real time, it was stuff that in the chronology of the show had literally just happened 3 minutes ago. And it's like, you remember when that car exploded? And then, yeah, I do remember. I was there. It was 3 minutes ago. It's
gonna make me sound like a pompous asshole, but you know, when you've been doing it for so long, it's tough to watch like TV and movies sometimes, because you can just see the gears grinding, and I can just picture the poor writer. You know what I mean? Like, you know why that scene happened, and you know where everything's going to go, and it's brutal. Yeah, but it's fun. You know, it beats having a real job.
That's true. That is absolutely true.
It's pretty fun.
Well, so speaking of real jobs, let's go back to before you are a big feature writer, taking on huge properties and over-explaining them to the masses based on studio notes, or as I call them, the notes from the people with the taste, because I love when execs say, they're like, yeah, I got, you know, like, I feel like I have great taste. And I'm like, really? The taste?
By the way, I will do a quick plug for executives. I think they do get a bad rap. You know, everybody thinks that Hollywood executives are so stupid. They're not all stupid, and a lot of them are really smart. Or maybe we've just been very lucky. I mean, we've worked with some great ones, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, not at all. And actually, I should, like, to that point, I think that there are a lot of great ones out there. And I actually know one of them that was watching the show, I found out a couple days ago, ended up going and getting in touch with Notes for Execs, one of our sponsors. And
really?
Yeah. And they ended up taking one of the courses. She was a junior exec.
Right.
But their thing, and it goes to your point about the note behind the note, is that there's really three aspects to a note. There's the reaction, which is inarguable. That's just your reaction. And then there's the diagnosis of why you think you're having that reaction, and potentially the prescription of And parsing those things out makes it infinitely easier to get and to give notes.
Yes. And then another little trick that I would tell any writers out there is you have to understand what stage of the process you're at.
Yeah.
I think writers get very wrapped up like, oh, I'm not going to do that line. I'm not going to do it. But it's like you're not shooting it the next day necessarily. If you were doing pages that day, then you want to sweat that line. But if you're in development and they want to change a little bit, it's like I think too many writers are afraid to experiment a little bit and afraid to try things, because for me, when you get a bad note, we've explored bad notes sometimes, and 9 times out of 10, a much better idea will come out of it. This shouldn't be precious. Screenplays are blueprints for a movie. And I think you have to be flexible with the process, and you have to explore things. And I don't think that we should be so precious, especially in early development.
Totally agree. And I think that it's analogous a little bit to like composing a symphony versus playing jazz. Mm-hmm. And that when you're writing a novel, yes, you can compose a symphony. But right. when you're doing a screenplay, like there's going to be a lot of stuff. And this came up in another one of the recent interviews where you're just going to have to improvise. And so like if you lay the foundation of the song and then like, okay, we're going to go do a little improv over here, and then we may record over it later. And
I remember something that Michael Bay told us, and Michael Bay gets bad rap. He's a very smart guy. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing. His movies are exactly the way they want them to be. You can say that that's not your type of film, which I get, but he knows what he's doing. Yeah. So I will never forget, we were sitting with him and we were going through the Friday the 13th script, and we got to this page and we had this huge monologue for a character, and he was laughing and he was like, this is one of my favorite scenes in the whole fucking script. And I was like, thanks, man. He's like, it is so good. It is so clever. He's like, and this young actor will never be able to deliver this. Never. He's like, we're going to be there all night doing 100 takes because they're not going to be able to pull this off. And I was like, what? And he was like, let's say it was 12 lines. He's like, it needs to be 3 lines. And I was crushed. And then when we were on set, I saw actors can struggle sometimes with a lot of material. And, it's a movie where it's not Star Wars, where you can just shoot forever. We have a limited number of days. And it's like, Michael was right. I was like, you have to keep this very simple. So you have to keep it moving. You know what I mean? So it's like little things like that where you realize, that there's so much going on behind the scenes that, a lot of us just don't think about.
Yeah. And something that I've observed sometimes, I don't know how much of it is intentional or just a seasoned writer really knowing what they're doing, is that there might be one character, and often an older character, who gets to do the big monologues and to do the really chunky, hard stuff.
Because they're good they're great actors and they can do it.
Right. And you give all that stuff to the one guy, because then you just got to find one guy that can do it.
Yeah.
And everybody else can just act.
Yeah. But when you're dealing with young actors, I mean, on Freddy vs. Jason, we originally had cast Brad Renfro as the lead. I'm sure you know what happened to Brad. And he showed up to the set and he was not in great shape. And, we were recasting roles, days before we were shooting. And so you have actors that don't even necessarily have the time to prepare. It's like, movie making a lot of it is a buy your pants type of thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Anyway, it's crazier than people think. It's nuts.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why there's so much great entertainment about the process of making entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely.
As Tasha added in the comments, we could call it pucks, which is one of my favorite references. I don't know if that rings a bell for you, Mark, but we won't get into it here. The question I was going to ask, and then we got back into the notes giving and all that, which is great. Yeah. I was just going to rewind a little bit and kind of get to where you started and what your journey has been, and what animates you as a writer.
That's a great question. I started at USC taking a lot of film classes. I wound up going to Johns Hopkins to study international relations and philosophy. I was going to be a lawyer, and then I wound up hooking up with Damian Shannon again, my writing partner, who went to NYU Film, who I knew at USC. And then we got together and it was like, let's just give this one shot before we each, go on with our lives to law school or whatever it is. We moved to
Sorry to pause you there. you started at USC undergrad,
Yeah. And
doing
then,
film stuff, and
yep.
transferred midstream.
Yep. My parents were very much of the get a degree in something that's going to pay you. Get a degree. Don't get a degree in film. And I actually think it's very good advice,
Yeah.
because no matter how good you are, the chances are not good that you're going to make it. I mean, the odds are stacked against you. So I was going to be a lawyer, you know what I mean? But then we were like, look, let's give this one shot before law school. And we moved to Las Vegas for our first script. And we got done. We had more of a novel. We didn't know what we were doing. And when we got to Hollywood, they were like, there's this guy named Scorsese. He's doing a movie called Casino. And there's this other movie called Rounders that are coming out, because we wrote our script about no limit poker players. So it was like, nobody's going to read that. But, that was our first script, and we got, a little bit of traction on it. So basically what we did was, and I tell a lot of young writers to do this, is to give yourself 5 years. Give yourself 5 years, try to make it. And if you don't have real traction, not making real progress, try something else. This is not for you, because not only do you have to be good, you have to be a little lucky. You have to be a little lucky. You have to meet the right person at the right time. The right material has to get in front of the right set of eyeballs. So when I was in LA, I was an assistant at Universal. Actually, not even the film group. I was at Universal Creative. And we wrote a script. We finally wrote a script just for us. We're like, we're just going to write the craziest script that we want to make. We broke all the rules. And I was an assistant. My phone rang, and it was this producer. And he's like, listen, I'm shooting a movie down in Van Nuys. Come to the set. I want to represent you guys. And I was like, couldn't believe it. And the movie was called Great Falls High. And I was like, oh, it's interesting, whatever. And then months later, they retitled it American Pie. So I was on the set of American Pie when they were making it. And that became our first manager. And that script was called Gator Farm. And, it's still kind of passed around today because it's such a crazy screenplay. It's basically a hard R talking animal movie. It's like Babe, if it was hard R. And then, basically your material gets passed around if it's really good. And that material found its way to Jeffrey Katzenberg. Jeffrey Katzenberg loved that script. He brought us in, was like, do you guys want to write my G-rated fish movie? That became Shark Tale. It was like, a hard R movie can turn into Shark Tale. You know what I mean? It's like you have a strange path. But I think if you break in with material, you want to write something that cuts through the noise. Unfortunately, a lot of writers, they look at the marketplace and they're like, well, they see a bad movie and they're like, well, I could do a little better than that. And that's sort of the crap plus one theory. You know what I mean? There's just a little bit better than what they saw. And unfortunately, crap plus one just doesn't get it done. Another one of my little pet lines to young writers is, you wouldn't believe how good you have to be to get the chance to write a bad movie. You know what I mean? You have to be really, really good to break into the business. So, I think that the writers are like, oh, well, serial killer stuff is doing really well. I'll do that. It's like, you can't follow the trends. You can't follow the marketplace. What you need to do is write something exciting that's in your voice, that's original, that's going to cut through the noise. That's how you get discovered. That's how you break in. And you do that by writing, crazy, great material that, you have to be a good writer. That is a given, but you have to sort of, you have to write something that cuts through the noise.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how we broke in.
And so, and for you, breaking through the noise was the vulgar talking animals.
Yeah, because for us, if I knew then what I know now, we would have never written that script. We kill a kid in it. We broke all the rules. We do all the stuff that they tell you that you can't do. But it was also smart. It's based on George Orwell's Animal Farm, but we did so our own twisted version of it. And people out here got it, and they got it. So that's what I would tell a writer is to Brian Kaufman has this line that I like, which is calculate less. You know what I mean? It's like, don't try to figure out the system. Don't try to beat the system. Just write something in your voice, because Hollywood is desperate for new voices. They really are. And it feels so impossible to break in. But, people ask me, how do you get an agent? It's really not that hard. All you have to do is write something great. That's the hard part. If you write something great, I promise you it will get discovered. You will break in, but you have to write something great.
I completely agree, though I will say in this day and age, usually when you write something great, you get a manager, and then
Yes,
eventually the agent comes on board.
100%. I always just say agent meaning representation, but I totally agree with you. We had a manager for like 17 years.
Yeah. Um, and I love. I mean, what? Let's go back even a little bit further than that
Mm-hmm.
to talk about just how and where you grew up, and what it was. And what it's a bold choice to put it lightly to go with R-rated talking animals in a world where
Mm-hmm.
that's not a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and to do the thing like killing the kid and whatever. Where does that come from? I mean, did you grow up crazy, or what was
Yeah,
it? What was your deal?
I grew up in Florida, which is crazy.
Okay, so
And I
already starts to make sense.
yeah, and I had actually visited an alligator farm, and I thought the place was really fucked up. And but then we were like, well, what if you take these characters, these two redneck brothers, and you take them very seriously, and you sort of understand them? You know what I mean? I think it's about people say write what you know, but I think it's also using your personal experience. Again, I meet writers who are fresh out of film school and they want to write that first script that's going to get sold. It's like I feel like those are the people that don't make it. The
Mm-hmm.
ones that I meet that made it is like I did 3 years in the Army. I became a logger in Oregon for a couple of years. I mean, it's like those people that had some life experience, I feel do better.
Mm-hmm.
After graduation, I worked in DC for a while. I worked in a law firm. I worked on the Hill. I've had a lot of weird jobs, and it's like you take all those little pieces, and it becomes your voice. And you can tell on the page if somebody has some life experience or not. At least I think that you can. And I think that when you have that sort of, I don't know, if you have a richer perspective, you know what I mean? That's why I think also diversity is so important now for Hollywood. It's like getting different voices in there and different experiences. It's like that's what we need. It's like it's not the same stuff where everybody's watched the same 100 movies and they're just regurgitating the same thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I mean, I think uh, being able to bring idiosyncratic experiences into things, it allows you to have. There's things that you just won't learn from watching another movie. Like you can
Of
only
course.
learn it from having some weird ass experience. And I say especially to people who aren't coming straight out of film school and wondering, did I miss the boat? Like, no, write about the other boat that you were on, or
Absolutely.
incorporate things from it.
The writers that I know that do well are the ones that find time to read, read books still, it's like you're never, your voice is never, you're always kind of growing. You're always kind of, and I can know it's like, it's so funny to think about it. It's like, somebody on the other end of this, when I'm talking to like a college class or a high school class, I know what they're always thinking. It's like Shark Tale, Freddy vs. Jason, Friday the 13th, Baywatch. What the hell are you talking about? These are bad movies. And it's like, it's funny because, we have, dozens of films that are set up and it's like, it's really hard to get the original ones made.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what the real career is. If you get a movie actually made, I mean, that's the dream. But the job is writing screenplays, you know what I mean? And developing. That's really what you're going to do. You're going to spend a lot of time writing and a lot of time pitching in rooms. That's the job. And it's like, it's going to be very little time on a red carpet because when you meet a writer that's somehow managed to get like 2 or 3 movies made, you know that person is very lucky. You know what I mean? Because most of the job is in the trenches.
Especially, and you're one of the last of the screenwriters in
Yeah,
a
we're
way,
dinosaurs. We're dinosaurs.
because everybody's doing TV or premium content now.
Yeah, but the good
Uh,
news is we held on long enough. We're some of the last people left. So, you know,
right
we
now,
had,
when somebody just wants a take on the reboot of, I don't know, I'm trying to think of what hasn't been rebooted yet.
right,
Bonanza as a movie.
right. They call us. No, well, the good news is,
Yeah,
for
where's the
us.
Bonanza movie, Mark? Make that.
By the way, I guarantee you that's in development. I guarantee it. But for Damien and I, we've always sold original scripts, and we've always had stuff, around town. We have a huge Vikings movie at Disney, you know what I mean? But it's just very hard to get made. But I mean, eventually, and I feel like it's starting to come around again, Hollywood takes those risks on original movies. So, now we have an original that Sam Raimi's directing at Sony that we're super excited about. We have an original at Warner Brothers with Jason Momoa and Peter Dinklage that we're super excited about. So, I mean, if you keep at it, and then again, you get a little lucky, you know what I mean? I think that Hollywood is sort of, they're ready to take risks on original material again. At least I hope.
I think actually, ironically, they're starting to look a little bit more original material in features
Yeah.
Than they are in TV, because in TV they're trying to do everything around IP.
Everything is flipping. And part of it is because, studios have to compete with Netflix and Apple and Amazon. And how did Netflix really sort of, dig in was they made a lot of original material. And I think they also demonstrated there's still an audience for it. So, that studios have to keep up, and they're going to have to invest in original material and original voices. So that's good for the writer.
Totally agree. I'm going to want to take a sponsorship break, but I want to leave you with a question to think about for when we come back, which is that you've got a lot of diversity in terms of the kinds of projects that you've done. And so I'm curious what the through line or through lines are between those things. You self-deprecatingly said that you thought that ultimately they didn't come out great, but I certainly have enjoyed your movies, and I know that there's a big difference between Shark Tale, Freddy vs. Jason, and Baywatch. So if you can connect those dots in terms of what theme or whatever when we come back, that'll be great. Also,
Definitely.
audience, please feel free to start chiming in with your questions if you have them. For the moment, I want to thank our sponsors, Roadmap Writers and Notes for Execs. Roadmap is a screenwriting education platform for writers looking for a guided path to success. Programs are hosted online by working industry executives and designed to empower writers with actionable tools to elevate their craft and cultivate industry relationships. Since 2016, Roadmap has helped more than 125 writers and counting signed for representation, including a bunch of friends of mine and many others get staffed, optioned, or sell their scripts. To learn more, visit roadmapwriters.com and use the code PANDEMIC to save $15. Roadmap Writers, the road to your screenwriting success starts here. Notes for Execs is a company that guides working entertainment executives on how to give better and more effective creative notes. Now they're opening their doors to writers as well, who can learn a lot about their own writing through learning about the notes-giving process. Visit notesforexecs.com for more information. And now I will rejoin Mark and say, what's all your stuff have in common?
Damien and I love to mix genres. That is our favorite thing to do. So, with Gator Farm, it's a horror action comedy, which is something
Talking Animals.
With Talking Animals, which is something they'll tell you never to do. Never do a horror comedy action. But, we were so inspired by movies like Tremors. We were like, that's a movie that we love. So we like to mix genres. And, that was what made executives first pay attention to us. Because it was like, oh, wow, you guys can do action and comedy and horror. And I also care about these characters. So then we've kind of tried to use that as we go through. So, for instance, we did a movie at New Line based on a great graphic novel called Hawaiian Dick. That's it's a private detective set in 1950s in Hawaii. Hawaiian Dick.
Sure.
But it's tropical noir with a little touch of the supernatural. So it's funny, it's scary, it's got action. That's what we like to do. Our Vikings movies at Disney, it's got monsters, it's got, movies like Pirates of the Caribbean, we like that kind of stuff, where it's like, it's giving the audience a little bit of everything. We have a project with the Russo brothers, which is a new version of A Christmas Carol. And Joe Russo said something to me that really spoke to me. And that was, the audience wants everything. He's like, if you can give them, you make them laugh, you make them cry, you surprise them, you shock them, you scare them all in the same movie. He's like, you've really got them. And if you look at, Endgame and those kind of movies, he's giving everything to the audience. You know what I mean? You're laughing, you're crying, you're excited, and that I think is a great goal. And that's something that we love. You look at a perfect movie like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders of the Lost Ark has everything. It's funny. It's got action. It's got a touch of the supernatural. It mixes genres. And that's the sort of the through line of all our stuff. especially the stuff that, that we still haven't gotten made yet, but we're trying. Our movie with Momoa and Dinklage, which is a new take on Van Helsing. It's funny, but it's scary. It's got action. I think in the trades it was called Midnight Run in a Bram Stoker's universe. So I mean, we like to mix stuff up. So I mean, when you see that movie, hopefully it's going to have a little bit of everything. And so that's the kind of stuff that we like to do.
That's cool, and that tracks. I think that I don't know which Russo said that the audience wants everything, but I think that that's right on. And I think I've talked a lot about Endgame and how brilliant I think it is.
They're great guys, by the way.
I've heard that, as a matter of fact, and you can tell that they're great guys when you see the cast of Community showing up in the movie, because that means that they actually forged social relationships.
That's right.
I think one of the things that was brilliant about Endgame was that it gave all that everything. It gave everything. I mean, obviously, it helped. It was 3 hours long, but that
and they had all the money in the world.
That helps too. That helps too. You can pay Natalie Portman $1 million to get out of bed, right. Or not get out of bed, as the case was. But yeah, the thing that I thought was so brilliant. I mean, you look at all of the franchises that ended in 2019. Little did we know that 2019 was also going to be like the grand finale of like America too. Like we were just like, hey, it's the big ending number. But you see, like Rise of Skywalker, didn't quite work. No. End of Game of Thrones didn't quite work.
Right.
Endgame worked because you could see it was like, okay, we want to have a big emotional payoff for each of the main characters. Mm-hmm. And we also want to have funny. We want to hit like real lows, real high highs.
And let's also plug the writers, Marcus and McFeely, who are great writers.
Yeah.
Those guys understand that too. We were talking to them where, I was like, how do you write, it's such a huge movie, and they were writing them both at the same time. How do you do this? How do you eat that elephant? And he was like, and they were like, one bite at a time.
Really?
You eat it one bite at a time. And he also said a lot of Zantacs, a lot of antacid. But it's crazy. But I mean, that's like, to answer your question, that's what we want to do. I mean, I remember I just read recently some retrospective on Freddy versus Jason. And I mean, and by the way, it was very positive and it was wonderful to read, but it made the point where like, this is not like other slasher movies. This is weird. It's got a lot of action in it and it's got a lot of humor in it, but it's also scary at parts. It's like, that's what makes us excited, is like when we can kind of mix all that up.
Do you think that your ability to, and your proclivity to mix genres and jump genres has made things easier or harder for you as a screenwriter because they can't really put you in a box?
Boy, that's really a great question. At times in our career, it's hurt us because, Hollywood works in lists. Mm-hmm. I know like a writer who, he's a hard sci-fi guy. That's what he does. That's all he does. And if there's a hard sci-fi script, it is coming his way. He knows that. There were writers that like, I know that we do female rom-com. That's what we do. And every female rom-com comes their way, every polish. So we weren't on a lot of those lists because we're kind of a little there, a little there, a little there. But then eventually, we stayed in the business long enough where it was like, oh, I understand what those guys do. So we've done work on comedies to help. We've done work on horror movies to help. We can then cross genres, which is more fun for us, when we do polishes or rewrites or that kind of thing. You get to work on lots of different kinds of stuff. But in terms of OWAs or whatever, less so, because we're not sort of the obvious guys on every, a specific list. But that's fine for us because we honestly would rather bring material to Hollywood now. Mm-hmm. We've been long enough where we just kind of want to do our own stuff. And like I said, with like the Raimi thing, it's an original, and and then the Legendary thing. So that's what we want to do now, is we want to, just keep pressing original stories, because I think that that's what the audience wants.
I completely agree. When you write those things, are you pitching them and then selling the pitch and then writing it, or are you writing them on spec?
We are different than most writers. We actually never write anything on spec.
Oh
We've
wow.
we've only written one spec in our whole lives, and that was Gator Farm, the first thing we sold.
Hmm.
Everything we've ever done has been from a pitch. And I'm not saying that's the way it's got to be, and I'm not saying it's the easiest way. Maybe it's the hardest way, but just for us personally, when we have an idea, we just go pitch it. We like pitching. We're good at it. And it's just always been the way we've done it. So yeah, we don't spec. But I mean, I understand why writers also do it. I mean, there's, that's got to be fun to have total control for a while. You know what I mean? Just to kind
Yeah.
of have your baby. But yeah, we don't do it that way.
Are there ideas that you've been really excited about doing it that way that you've pitched that didn't sell and that you just said, okay, I'm gonna
Oh,
just
of
let that
course.
go?
I mean, we've heard any writer that's been in the business long enough. I mean, we've heard no thousands of times.
Yes, of
I mean,
course.
that's why you have to have a really thick skin. I mean, I remember we had a pitch one time, and like 2 minutes in, the executives said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" He goes, "You guys can't be serious." Literally, it's like, "You can't be serious," and we're like, "We are serious." And she was like, "All right, keep going."
And stop calling me Shirley.
I
Uh,
know. You just have to have a thick skin. You have to believe in what you're doing. And I mean, we could have had an entire other conversation about pitching because it is its own sort of monster and its own beast. And if anybody watching that kind of wonders about that, my advice is always to get really comfortable in front of people. And if you're very uncomfortable in front of people, go to an open mic night. I know that sounds
mhm.
crazy. I know that sounds scary, but just get up and just tell a story. If you can't tell a story about, something that happened to you when you were a kid or your girlfriend or boyfriend or what happened to you that morning, if you can't stand up in front of a crowd and entertainingly kind of, spin a tale, this job might not be for you because you're going to spend a lot of time in rooms trying to convey your idea and try to get something across. You have to be comfortable. You
Yeah.
have to get over your nervousness of talking to people or being weirded out by, pitching your ideas. Pitching is not hard. You're basically just describing this awesome movie that you saw the night before. You know what I mean? You see the movie in your head and you're telling the best version of it. You're not telling every boring scene. You wouldn't tell your friend that way. You would tell them the big idea and the high points, and you would be very excited about it, and you'd be passionate and energetic and creative, and that's the way you got to do.
And there's a performative aspect to that, which I
There
think a lot
is.
of writers, they think I'm a writer and they're just writing. And
Yeah.
it's not surprising to me that a lot of actors end up becoming reasonably successful writers, which is not to say
Right.
that all writers can act or not all actors can write. That
Yeah.
there are a lot of actors who, try and break in as writers, and it's their stuff is awful. But being able to go in and pitch that way and to have confidence and some charisma and some swagger to it,
Yeah.
I think that really matters.
Look, when we
Um,
pitched this last version of Friday the 13th, I mean, in one room we had president of production from Paramount, president of production from New Line, because it was co-production between two studios. It had Michael Bay. I mean, it was a big room. As a matter of fact, it had 13 people in it, as luck as a coincidence would have it.
it's like a
But
small club.
it was 13 people, and you have to command that room. And if you're weak and you don't know what you're talking about, they're going to steamroll you. They're going to toss you out. It's like you have to be able to get a vision across. It's really important.
Yeah, and that raises another interesting point to me, which is how do you, when you're writing and composing your pitch, how do you go about that process? Because it's not just the performance in the room. You have to actually write a
Of
pitch
course, of
and decide
course.
what to keep in and what to keep out and what's going to be confusing and how do you structure that for yourself?
It's a long process and it's a difficult process. And like I said, we've been professionals for 22 years. So we've done every version. I've done pitches where we have written it out and it's like a 9-page document and I've memorized it. And then I just tried to make it, that's not the best way to do it.
Mm.
Basically, I think the best ways to do it is to, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with writing out. We always use treatments, first of all. So we always have a document. I tend never to look at the document. I just know it inside and out. Something that I learned very early, we spent weeks coming up with this pitch with this executive at MGM. And then we finally got in front of the head of the studio And I was about 10 seconds in. You're going to think I'm exaggerating, but I was about 10 seconds in. But the guy was like, listen, I got to go. How does it end? It's like you have to have the 20-minute version in your head, 10-minute version, the 5-minute version. You just have to know your story inside and out, and you have to be able to read the room. You're talking to someone, they're not interested. You better pick it up. You better, you know what I mean? You better wake them up. You better do something. You have to read the room. But to answer your question specifically, you have to know your characters, beginning, middle, and end. Roughly pitch the hell out of Act 1, summarize Act 2, and then pitch Act 3 like your life depends. I've jumped up before I've jumped up on the table. I mean, you gotta really kind of bring it a little bit. But most pitches for us usually it's about 8 or 9 page document, like a treatment that we'll just know inside and out. And then for us now it's a conversation. We make sure we cover tone, characters, the world, but essentially you're telling them a story. You're telling them, like I said before, a movie that you've seen that you think is just the greatest fucking movie in the world, and you're telling it to them. But the way I always tell writers is they're going to give you an hour for the meeting. You're going to open up with some chit chat. You're going to tell a little light joke or whatever to kind of break the ice. Then you're going to pitch, and your pitch probably shouldn't be longer than 20, 25 minutes at most. And then they're going to have questions afterward. The worst pitches is when they're like, well told, we'll let you know. You want them engaged. You want them to have lots of questions and they're really thinking about it. And, you have to have answers. But at the same time, if you don't know, you can always say something like, I don't know, that's really interesting, blah, 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 blah. But it's a conversation. But they're going to give you an hour. But I would keep it to 20 or 25 minutes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And in the same vein, I've got Julianne Baxter, one of our regular viewers, has been asking a few questions about this. I know that your screen is kind of small, but she says, how often do you pitch an idea and they love it and you write it, and when they read it, they say, this isn't what you pitched? Does that happen? Do you get that?
It has happened. And that is crushing. That happened earlier in our career.
Right.
When we
I'd
really
imagine less now.
Because now we know the players more, and we know what studios can shoot and what things are going to cost. I mean, we know more of that. But I think younger writers make a mistake where sometimes when they say things like that's not what we thought, that's coded language for this is more expensive than I thought it was going to be. That's coded language for we can't cast this. That's more, you know what I mean? There's these mistakes that you can make as a young writer that you'll get over the longer you're in development. So, but I think the key is realizing that these people are your partners. Don't sort of disappear and come back like a year later with some draft. You have to keep them engaged. You know what I mean? You have to. Even the process of writing should be a conversation. If you have an exciting idea that's very different than what you did, shoot them an email. It says, oh my God, I have this idea that I'm going to incorporate it. You're going to love it. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I think the longer you're in the business, the more you realize that these people are your partners. They're not the enemy. You know what I mean? They want you to do well. They want you to deliver a screenplay that you can make. So it's like, it's just something that you have to kind of develop, is to kind of figure out what they want. But, that's why you want to make sure your pitch is comprehensive. So it's like they know exactly what they're getting.
I think that that's exactly right. And I think that understanding the code of Hollywood and the coded language it's tricky. It's hard to do.
Yeah, like I said, the worst thing that you can hear after a pitch is well told. That's a pass.
Right.
Too many writers, they don't understand that the only yes is money. Unfortunately, writers, they'll meet a producer and the producer will say, oh, these are great characters. I wish there was more of this. That's a no. I loved your story. That's a no. You know what I mean? These are all no's. The only yes is paying you. It's a
good point. I like that adds on nicely to something that I was told a while ago, which is that in Hollywood, yes means maybe. Maybe means no. No means go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
And now to add on to that, and money means yes.
Yes.
So money means yes. Yes
Yeah.
means maybe. Maybe means no. No means fuck you.
That's exactly right. That is perfect.
Yeah. Because there's no value to somebody in actually saying no.
No. Why would you ever say no? Because that person could, who knows what they're going to be in a year, 5 years.
Right.
You don't want to ever be the person. I mean, it's very unusual. I mean, Hollywood, they're all so nice. They're such nice sharks. You know what I mean? And they're never going to tell you, sadly, they're never going to tell you the truth. And the problem is when you start, you don't know any better.
Right.
So I'll meet a writer and they've been like, oh, well, I've been speccing this thing for a producer. How long have you been working on it? Like a year and a half. You know, they said that I'm really, you know, I'm really getting there with the characters. I'm like, stop writing. You are wasting your time. You know, they're just, you know, that's free development for them. You know, that's just you off picking at the ground. Wow, maybe they'll stumble on a piece of gold and then it's mine. But you're the one doing all that labor. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. You're the one digging.
You're the one digging, and maybe somehow you strike gold and then it's theirs. It's like, man, I meet these writers. If I can just give you one piece of advice, you know, hold on to it forever. Don't ever spec anything you don't control the rights to. Don't ever spec someone else's idea. The only time you spec is when you control it. Because when you're speccing something that you don't control or somebody else's IP, you don't have any leverage and you're going to get your advantage. They're going to take advantage of you.
Yeah. And to be clear, and I know the difference. I am not sure some of the folks in the audience might. In this case, speccing specifically means writing without pay. If they've got the rights to something and they want to pay you to write it, great, that's a gig. Knowing full well that at the end of it,
if they're paying you, then they're your boss, and you write it. But you know, too many writers, it's like, hey man, I have this magazine article. We make a great movie. Maybe you write up the script. You know, we go out with it. Don't do that.
Right.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Now, in my experience, and you tell me if you think that this is not a good idea, you can come up with a pitch on it.
Sure.
Go out and pitch it with them.
That's the job.
But beyond, right, exactly.
Nothing
and
wrong
maybe
with
a very detailed pitch. Yeah.
But don't write it.
But don't write it. Exactly.
And if you're spending, you know, weeks and weeks and months coming up with a take, don't do that. You can come up with a take for anything in 2 weeks. And I mean anything. Yeah. And if you're spending more of the time on that, you're wasting your time because you're not going to do anything more that's going to get them to say yes. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. And I like to have a certain amount of time. And this is a good question for you as we kind of come into the home stretch wrapping up bit of this, is the amount of time for different parts of the process. Mm-hmm. So like coming up with a take, 2 weeks max.
Correct.
And I'm assuming too, you've probably come up with takes in significantly less than that for things.
You've come up with a take in 24 hours.
Right. And so 2 weeks max for the take. How much time do you take on a draft? You know, they're getting paid for, obviously.
They usually expect you to get it done in like, I think they give you like 8 to 10 weeks. Right. And that's about right. You know, that's about how long it should take. You know, and then it's different than TV. You know, when TV has a deadline, they're not kidding. If they say 5 o'clock Tuesday, it's 5 o'clock Tuesday or you're fired.
Exactly.
I mean, that is the way TV works. It is a deadline-oriented thing. That is not true in features. If it's due Monday, half the writers I know on Friday are telling them, listen, you might not get it Monday. It might take me another week. But a classic line, and this is true, and we've said this many times because we believed it, look, do you want it good or do you want it fast? Right. Now, sometimes they'll say fast because like maybe they got to get to an act or whatever, but generally they want it good. So in features, you can go a little over. But again, they don't like surprises. Tell them. Just tell them. Be honest with them. Listen, you know, I hit a stumbling block, but I got this new idea. It's going to be a couple weeks late, but I got to tell you, I think it's going to be great. Whatever. Actually, real quick piece of advice. Under promise and over deliver. Yeah. I mean, don't tell them you can turn it around in a week and then do it in 3. Tell them you can do it in 3 and then give it to them in a week. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Under promise, over deliver. Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. That's true in most things, but especially
in something that's as subjective, or can be as subjective as screenwriting. Although in that scenario, I would promise 3 weeks, and even if you finish it in 1, give it to them in 2, because then they're going to wonder what's wrong.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
When you get something for a rewrite, punch up, that kind of thing, what's your time scale?
So that's usually they got you on a weekly. So they're paying you by the week. So it is definitely in their best interest and yours to do it as fast as possible. So generally with that, you take a couple of meetings, you meet the actor, the director, or whatever it is. But on a weekly, I mean, you're not usually spending more than 2 or 3 weeks on it max. At least in my experience. At that level, they want it turned around. That means, we need something done quickly. But on the general rewrite, I mean, if it's page 1, it might be 8 to 10 weeks again. It depends on how much work the draft needs. Is it a draft and a set, or is it a polish? It just depends on sort of how much work that they need, and everything in between. So everything is negotiable, but it just depends on how much they need.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you have, more so than some of our other guests, and some of the other guests, we've gotten into real personal stories and that kind of thing. And then some guests we get into just really great nuts and bolts of the business. And I'm curious, are there any other, because you do, well, actually, I'm going to ask this question from the audience. This will be our penultimate question, and then I'll ask basically if there are any pieces of advice that you like to give that we haven't hit yet, because you have just a lot of bite-sized advice. But Trevin McGee asks, it's the first time I've watched live, and it's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. As a writer with features, pilots, and treatments at my disposal, how do you get to pitch? What's your first pitch?
You're writing. They'll let you in the door if they read a piece of material that they love. So that's sort of like, that's the catch-22 of it, isn't it? It's like, everybody has a pitch, everybody has an idea, but can you get in the room? And the way you get in the room is your material.
Yeah.
We've never pitched where that person hasn't read us. It doesn't happen. So they know your work. They know that this guy can deliver, because they're not just buying the idea. And this is the thing that writers don't understand. You can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you can't execute it, it's not of value to them.
Right.
So, 20 years ago, you could sell a log line. What I mean? It's like, you could have, the farmer, and then his sheep takes over you could sell that, and then they'll hire a writer to write it. They don't do that anymore.
Right.
You have to be able to execute the idea. So the way you get to pitch is you write a great fucking screenplay that gets you a manager. That manager sends it to a producer or a studio exec that says, hey, I know you're looking for a writer for Sonic 2. You should read this guy. They read the script, or more to the point, about 10 pages of that script, and they go, this guy can write. I'll take a meeting with him. And then you get your chance. And then you go in and you blow them away, and you get hired to write Sonic 2. And then if that movie makes money, then you get a chance to maybe do something that you actually want to write.
Hey, some people want to write Sonic 2.
By the way, I never saw Sonic. I heard it was pretty good.
Yeah. Once they re-rendered it.
Yeah. But that's sort of my point, is like, Hollywood wants to make the movies that they want to make, and a lot of it that is IP driven. And, what you want to do sometimes is, you do one for them, and you show them that, you can move their material down the field. I think that too many writers, when they have general meetings, when they do have a piece of material that people like, and they go on 20 general meetings and they get nothing out of it except bottles of water, because the writer is looking across the desk thinking, what can this person do for me? Are they going to do my ideas? But what the writer is missing, that's the same thing that they're thinking about you. That executive is thinking, what's this guy going to do for me? Is this guy going to move Sonic 2 down the field? So when you're first starting off, you're going to write some stuff that you might not be, it's not your end goal, but it's you're showing them that you can do this job. And then they trust you, and then they trust you to have your own idea. Does that make sense? I mean, it feels like I'm telling you sell out, and that's not what I'm saying.
But also sell out for sure.
I'm saying if you want to be in this game, you're going to have to play their game a little bit too. They're not necessarily going to bend over backwards for you coming out of the gate. This is a tough business, and you're asking someone, we have a movie, it's budgeted $150 million. It's like, that's a lot of money. And they're going to have to trust you. And they're going to have to think that you know what you're doing, especially if you're mixing genres and doing something that's a little scary for them. You know what I mean? That's trust, and that's a big leap. Can you get an actor that means something? Can you get a director that means something? And that's all your material. So that's a long way of saying you get in the room by writing something really, really good.
Yeah. And I guess I'd love to end actually by asking full circle, on the set of Baywatch or other movies where I know there are writers on set,
Yeah.
and rewriting and punching up and coming up with stuff on set. I guess let's end by just talking a little bit about that experience, because that's something that not everyone has.
Yeah. Well, for instance, God, this is going to sound like I'm passing the buck, but two writers followed us on Baywatch.
Oh, I thought it was you that was on set.
We visited the set. We were not the on-set writers.
My mistake.
Yeah, well, it's an easy mistake to make. So, our screenplay is what got greenlit, but a lot of the jokes in that movie, those aren't our jokes, because there was somebody on the set. The Rock has an idea, the producer has an idea, and there's somebody there, and they type it up. And I might look at it and be like, our joke was better. That's the job on a movie like that. So yeah, we were not the last writers on Baywatch. But then, but when it all comes down to it, then they have a thing called arbitration, and then basically what that is three writers who are experienced at arbitrating. They look at all the screenplays and they say, who is the author of this? Who is going to get screen credit? And then that's its own. We could spend her all night on that. So we were determined to get screenplay credit, but a lot of the stuff that's on screen, like especially like little things like jokes, not ours.
Right. And bit by bit, joke by joke, the vision of it can erode.
It's true. Now I feel like we're really ending on a dark note, but I think I heard this from a producer one time, and this applies to when you're a writer, they'll sometimes ask you to make changes that you don't want to make, that you think is making the screenplay worse. And the way that it's kind of classically put is it's taking a piss in the soup. You're adding a little bit of piss in the soup, and you're like, you can't really taste it. It's a little bit of piss, but But at some point, if the soup tastes like piss, it's your fucking fault, right? Because it's like you made it worse and worse and worse.
Right.
So, at some point, even though you feel like, you got to compromise a little bit, you have to defend the integrity of the soup or it's going to taste like hell. So that's my final warning to you, is to defend your screenplays. But, you're not going to win every battle. This is a tough job, but that's why they pay you.
Yeah. Well, I love this, and I could just listen to. Oh, I guess I should say, are there any other pieces of advice that you like to give? Because all of these are so great. Are there any other pieces of advice that you like to give that we haven't gotten to?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like we've covered a lot of stuff. I feel like, look, this is a very, very tough job, and everybody wants to do it, but God, like as I said at the beginning, don't be too hard on yourself. You got to be a little lucky. The right person has to read it at the right time. So don't spend 2 years on the same script. Okay, I'll give you a quick final piece of advice. So we have a classroom, right? And the job is we're going to make clay pots. Okay, so half the room I tell, make as many clay pots as you can in an hour. Okay. The other half of the class, I say, make one clay pot as good as you possibly can make it. Okay. At the end of the hour, here's what happens. The class that just worked on just the one pot looks okay, not bad, pretty good. The one that did the tons of pots, most of them look like shit, but one miraculously looks incredible. That is screenwriting when you're starting out. Make a lot of pots, write a lot of scripts. You're going to get better at it. Don't work on one piece of material forever. So I think that is like advice that I think is crucial. When you're starting out, write a lot.
Yeah.
Did that pot thing make any sense? I kind of stumbled through that. Did that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely makes sense.
Okay, good.
and one of our audience members just commented, the many pot technique. Exactly. That if you have one takeaway from Mark Swift,
it's the
smoke
pots.
a lot of pot.
That's right.
But it's true, and actually, it strikes me that one of my pet peeves, like I think that the Hollywood development process, like if they had the let's make a lot of pots in
Yes.
mind, and be like, you know what, let's spend less on each pot, but instead of spending $150 million on this thing, we're going to make 3 for 50 and it'll be fine.
Right.
Or for that matter, like 10 for 5, or, you know, like Blumhouse or whatever does, and just make a pot, make a pot, make a pot, make a pot, make a pot. You make 100 pots. One of those pots is going to be freaking amazing and pay for all the other pots.
Right. Well, that they do think of it that way, but that's what development is. They'll develop 100 scripts for everyone they make.
Yes.
So in their minds, they are doing that. But to your point, they should be trying more pots even to make them. But, you know, it's such a huge risk. You know, there's so much money on the line that it's like, for them, it's always the opportunity cost. It's like, okay, you put out a movie on a weekend, but what else could you have put on that weekend that could have made money? And there's only so many weekends in the year. But of course, that was when there was no pandemic and we actually went to the movies.
Exactly. Now, like, I don't remember who it was. I think it was the new exec at Comedy Central that I was reading who said, you know, we're not making TV anymore. We're making content.
That's
and
right.
It's like, oh yeah, we're in the content business.
That's
and
right.
He was talking about how, like, yeah, we want to make more. Comedy Central, as I'm sure you probably had a meeting about now, is making, they're going to be making like a couple movies a month.
Yeah.
And putting it on their online platform with the Comedy Central branding and whatever, and they're functionally backdoor pilots.
Why not?
And they're making them real cheap. And that is like, we're making a bunch of pots because we're not giving up a time slot. We're not giving up.
Streaming has no, there's no, you know, you can do it. Yeah. As many movies as you want.
Right.
Yeah.
And the only thing you lose is a little bit of money.
That's right. I think
which they have plenty of.
It's actually an excellent strategy, and it's another tip for anybody watching this. I mean, they know it better than someone my age knows it. It's never been easier to make a movie. I mean, the iPhone is a lot better camera than what Kubrick was using. I mean, that's sacrilegious, but
well, Kubrick could have done a lot of shit with an iPhone.
He could have done a lot of shit with an iPhone. And importantly, there's never been more outlets to get your stuff out there. I mean, go make something, you know. I see it happen all the time. Somebody will make a short, a really good short. They'll get a meeting at New Line. They're making a horror movie. Ask David Sandberg about that. Ask those guys about that. Ask, you know, I mean, it happens. Go make a great short. I'm telling you, it will get noticed if it's really good. And there's never been more ways to get it out there, you know. I mean, on Twitter, you can talk to anybody. I mean, anybody. It's unbelievable. You can even talk to me. But, I mean, but yeah, get your stuff out there. You know what I mean? It's never been easier.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to ask the audience to write in as I do my final sponsorship thing with all of the thanks and kind words for Mark and compliments about this interview for him. And I will return in a moment and read those, Mark, to you. And that'll be our high note to end on. And then I'll duck out.
Great.
Here, I just want to say thank you to everybody for watching, and please like, follow, share, and subscribe. Tonight's episode has been brought to you by Roadmap Writers and Notes for Execs. Roadmap Writers is an online writer education platform hosted by working industry executives. If you're looking for a real-world solution to help develop, market, and sell your script, visit roadmapwriters.com to learn more. Notes for Execs is a company that guides working entertainment executives on how to give better and more effective creative notes. Now they're opening their doors to writers as well, who can learn a lot about their own writing through learning about the notes-giving process. Visit notesforexecs.com for more information. I will be back on Monday night with a pre-recorded interview, actually, that we've been sitting on for a while in case somebody canceled, but nobody's canceled, so we're just going to air it. And this is with Harris Danow, who came up on... the interview happened so long ago, I don't remember what his first show was, but most recently he was on Daisy Jones and the Six. He also came up on Casual, and I believe he was on Mozart in the Jungle. And it's just a really... Oh, and Little Fires Everywhere. That was the big one, but not Mozart, Tasha's whispering in my ear. But not Mozart. That's right. Little fires everywhere. So, yeah, tune in for that on Thursday. And now I will just read this note here from, here we go. Banners off. Back to Mark. Still getting the hang of the ending of this after 47 interviews. But, and he was on the newsroom, Tasha reminds me. Great to have you, Mark. Lots of nuggets and really appreciate your time. Right on, Julianne. Yes, thank you, gentlemen. Adds the invisible A. And Julianne Baxter says, make a lot of pots. Heart. So thank you so much, Mark. And audience, I leave you as always with a little bit of upbeat heavy metal.
Pandemic.